So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today we have an interesting topic. It's the Order of the Black Sun, and Wayne McRoy is back. And before we start, I would just briefly um, share my screen so that everybody has seen it. So, that is the Black Sun symbol. And Wayne, there are people that are saying that this is a very, very ancient symbol, but I don't think so. I mean, yes, we have, um, in ancient times, um, depictions of the sun. We have the winged sun, very popular. But this particular one I couldn't find before the SS used it.
Well, it's interesting that you should bring that up. This is a symbol, and I think this symbol has actually morphed over time. Now, this is also associated with the swastika, of course, this whole black sun ideology and symbolism that was adopted by the SS. And that particular symbol you were showing on there, I think that has its roots back in ancient India, if memory serves me correctly. Now, that may have gone through some transformations through time to get to that more modernized form of the symbol, but it represents the same archetype as the older symbols did, and that would be the black sun, the concept of the black sun. And this is something that is really a massive topic to cover. There's so many directions to go with this. Things like the actual presence of a second sun in our solar system even relate to this. So there's a lot there to unpack with all of it. And of course, this is an old esoteric symbol that goes back a long ways in the secret schools and many of the secret fraternities, occult fraternities that arose around the Nazi Party during that time frame just prior to World War II and on up through World War II, adopted some of these symbols and really took on some connections with this. And this falls into things like the Vril Society or the various other groups that formed around the Nazi Party. So you have all of these interests in place. The Thule Society, same type of a thing. Now these were two separate occult organizations, but they had some crossover at certain points, and they had this common framework, these symbols that they worked into their systems. And it's interesting when you go back and you look at some of the archetypes that it's based upon. And what exactly was the Nazi Party looking for? That's the big question that comes out of this. What were these organizations that kind of formed around this black sun concept? What were they looking for? And where does some of this ideology come from? And I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from a guy named Bulwer Lytton, who wrote some things, esoteric things, stories, fictional stories, around which things like the Vril Society and the Thule Society formulated many of their occult concepts. So when you go back and you look historically at this in the old esoteric schools, you always come to these same set of things, these archetypes present in a work of fiction by this guy who was heavily involved in the secret society groups. So a lot of things have been set up in the modern era by this, in the modern forms of occultism or the modern teachings in the occult with this. And it surrounds this black sun concept. And it's about a hidden type of energy and a hidden type of power within the realms or auspices of the invisible world. And some would even argue and lay claim that there may be a second sun in our solar system that they refer to as the black sun or the source sun. And if you go back into the older forms of esotericism, you find this concept reified in those old teachings that there is a second sun. And this is where some of the ideology has come from, it would seem, when you go back to these older occult traditions. And they've been popularized in the modern era by some of the theosophists and the people that have taken hold of the work that these organizations that surrounded themselves with the Nazi ideology were looking at. And they were looking for evidences of some of these old technologies, for lack of a better term, back in some of the Near East and the Eastern places. You'll notice, you hear the stories about the Nazis looking for artifacts, and of course this relates back to some of the old Indian writings and stuff like that, like the Vimanika Shastra and those various other texts, and they have really brought forth this new type of mythology that surrounds the Nazis' sciences that they were pursuing and the use of technologies that come from a more ancient source. They were looking for things like anti-gravitic propulsion craft and stuff like that. Things that have arisen in prominence in the circles of ufology and stuff. If you pursue that back and look at the Nazi connections to some of these things like the Bell, Die Glocke, that project that was going on, that was studied very heavily by Witkowski and others who really delved deeply into this, and they found they were looking back at some of these old Indian Sanskrit writings and stuff like that and looking for these old artifacts that were written about in some of those writings. So they had
did they do that because of the Vimanas?
I think that's part of it. That was one of the things they were looking at. But they were also claiming they were getting messages, like telepathic messages from Aldebaran and from other places, like that out in the realms of outer space. This is what they claim. They were getting these telepathic messages from what they termed extraterrestrials from these systems that seemed to have something to do with that. And they were being given these downloads and told stuff about these are the claims of like the Fool Society, the Vril Society, those types of places, and many that were very heavily involved in the SS and the Nazi Party. They were big on this stuff. Like Heinrich Himmler was big time into all of this occult thinking, as was Hitler. Hitler was into this stuff too, not as much in degree as was Himmler and those type of people that were involved in the Nazi Party, but certainly, like, this was something that really aligned with some of their ideologies, and they really put some credence into this potential source of information that they deemed extraterrestrial that was coming to them. And they went searching for these reifications of it in the ancient Sanskrit and these other old places. So they were looking around, they were gathering up some of these artifacts, and these crossed the bounds between the artifacts of the Eastern religious cultures and the Western cultures. They were looking for artifacts associated with Christianity as well. And that's what the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark was based on. They were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. They were looking for this stuff. They were looking for the Spear of Destiny. All of these things were kind of engrafted into this new Nazi mythos that has come about now. Now, it's hard to get to some of the roots and truth of what it is exactly that they did find and what exactly it was that they were looking for. But these are certainly some of the claims that have come out from within some of the groups they're in. So when you realize that they're claiming that they had these messages from somewhere else, some extraterrestrial source that was telling them about the utilization of this new type of energy, this vril energy, and these kind of things, it's not really new. If you go back in the old occult works, you find talk of some of these same things. So they were looking for that. They recognized the pattern there. They recognized there might be something to this. So they were getting these channeled messages from these intelligences that claim to be extraterrestrial from certain places, and they were telling them about these technologies and these energies that could be accessed, and that this has been done before here on Earth. And they began looking for some of these older things that associate with that, things like the Vimanas, that type of a concept. And they were certainly developing technologies based around some of these ideas. But central to all of this, to get back on point, is this concept of the black sun, which represents this invisible energy that can be accessed and can manifest here physically in a very real way. So this is what it was all based around. And of course, you have to apply the law of analogy to all of this, because this is how the occultists and the alchemists and stuff of old have worked. They always apply the law of analogies, because sometimes there's certain concepts that are very difficult to describe just through mere language. So sometimes you need to tell a story or a mythology based around it. And that's why we go back to some of these older ways of thinking and these older stories. So the point to this is the truthfulness of some of what's been told within the newer Nazi mythos that arose around these technologies and stuff. It may or may not be true, but that's irrelevant because it's the point of the archetype that it represents. It's that myth crafting that is the important aspect to all of it. It's the way that they could convey the information to people in a way that people could comprehend or maybe be able to identify with in certain ways. So the law of analogy applied with this. So certainly it seems there may be some truths behind this notion of this energy source, this 0-point energy source, as we would call it in modern terminology, or vacuum energy. They call it all kinds of stuff, the quantum vacuum field, all of these things, free energy. That's what they were searching for at the end of the day, access to this free energy that seems to be ever present within the ether that surrounds the earth. So if they were able to access this at some point, it could be transformational to humanity and society and the world at large, not just technologically, but in many different ways. So this is the concept that undergirds a lot of it. And in order to get a good grasp of it, you have to look back at some of the older systems and archetypes that they draw from. So once again, are there some maybe true aspects to this? Perhaps. But a lot of it falls back once again on this law of analogy that the occultists like to use so much in their myth crafting and their storytelling, because it does represent an idea. And the idea oftentimes cannot be adequately expressed outside of the use of storytelling. And that's an important thing that human beings do. We like to tell stories and we like to convey ideas through stories. That's why, even in the Bible, Jesus taught by parables. He used parables, stories, to express ideas that people would understand in a more simplistic fashion than could be adequately explained just through mere words, as far as giving you a definition, like a straightforward definition. Sometimes we just need the story to associate with that. And much of this falls under this category of the black sun. So it's a concept in and of itself that's multifaceted in all its different layers. And this one symbol has been put forward just to represent all those different layers. So you're talking about the potential for a second existing solar body in our solar system. First of all, that's one thing engrafted in there. Secondly, it's this secret energy source that's engrafted in there. And thirdly, it's about manifestation of consciousness itself. It's about the unconscious mind when you want to get into Jungian terminology with it. So we have all of these different, that's just 3 layers of the onion here. Like I said, this is a massive topic to take on.
Yeah, and maybe we should make a series out of this.
Well, it's important that we discuss this stuff because some of these symbols are so prevalent in our modern day that people don't even recognize what's the hidden entendre behind them. And this is some of what's behind this symbol. And you even have things that have emerged from this, like the story of Nibiru, right? This missing planet that they say exists in the solar system and stuff like that. It's all tied into this. It's all the same myth representation. It's all the same archetype. And that's the important component of it here. So regardless of whether it's physically true or not that this exists, that's irrelevant. It's the story that's important. It's the archetype that's important. It's the effect on the unconscious human mind that's important. It's the energetic principle that's important. And that is a very real thing. There's this definite energetic principle involved with this, and it affects human consciousness and the human mind in many different ways. And that's what I think was understood by some of the occultists surrounding this idea and why it's been leveraged in the way it has. Now, can this lead to physical developments here in the world that bring about new technologies? Possibly, because like I said, the energetic principle behind it's a very real thing. And our understanding of it is very limited.
So, Heinrich Himmler, he had a mentor, and his name was Kurt Maria Willigut. And Willigut believed that there once was a burnt out star, a black sun. Funny enough, it was called Centaur. And this is, of course, an anagram for Saturn, Centaur. And we have a centaur as a musical instrument in Persia. So, and from this mystical, okay, so this centaur, this burnt out star, used to be the center of our solar system, according to his beliefs. And it was the secret of a mystical power that people, who were familiar with the concept could tap into, and others then later on called it vril. So would you agree, because we have these 12 columns in that star, that these 12 columns represent the zodiac?
Always, always when you see the number 12, that represents the zodiac in just about every way you could think of. And some of this goes back to these more archetypal ways of thinking of antiquity and of the old concepts. They understood, they divided the sky into these 12 separate parts. And actually, at one point, many people claim it was 13 different parts, that there's 13 different signs in the zodiac if you include Ophiuchus. And that's a discussion for another day, though. But 12 has been adopted across the board throughout all different systems of religion, philosophy, science. This number is central to everything that goes on in the world. I mean, look at our clocks. It's all based on this number 12 as well. It's about the divisions of time. And that's what has been adopted. And it is zodiacal. So, of course, this representation of the 12 given there, it's the same thing. It's harkening back to this same archetype. And I do find it interesting that he's talking about this second sun, this burned out sun, this invisible black sun. You can't see it anymore. It's not giving off light. Or some claim that it is the source of the light. And to understand this better is to look at the principle of the philosophy of fire, as put forward by some of these occultists who claim to be the philosophers of fire. Fire has two particular elements to it. First of all, it has the fire itself, which is what generates the heat. The fire is the heat. And there's the flame, which gives off the light. So this would be concurrent with thinking in terms of the black sun as the source of the heat, the invisible source of heat, or the fire, and the visible sun being the flame or the light of the world, giving off the light. So you have these two components together. And this talks about the visible and the invisible, and the emanation of the invisible into the visible realm, into manifestation. So all of this has these esoteric or occultic type connotations to it. So we have the concept of the source sun that gives off the heat, and the visible sun, which gives off the light and is the light of the world. And it's an interesting way of thinking, because certainly we see a lot of the symbolism used in entertainment culture. And I'm thinking particularly of our most modern myth that most people are familiar with. It's called Star Wars. When you watch the original Star Wars, well, you notice Luke Skywalker, he lives on a planet with two suns, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So they put this stuff out there all the time for people to pick up on. And they'll tell you in the secret schools, yes, we're aware there's two suns. They know about it. And that's something we've been programmed or indoctrinated into thinking as being nonsensical in the modern era. The concept that we may actually have two suns in our solar system. And that way of thinking has taken on this air of science, so that we have a single sun, although they will make the observation. Most other solar systems that we've been able to observe in astronomical terms, well, they have multiple stars in them. It's interesting that ours only has one star, and they have all of these other things that they've noticed in astronomical terms, wherein it seems like there's extra mass in our solar system that they can't account for, and they don't know where this comes from. And this has led to speculation about things like Nibiru, as we had said earlier. the concept of this extra planet in our solar system that is most of the time invisible, but every once in a while it will cross paths with us here and we'll see it. Well, the same is said about perhaps the existence of this second sun. Sometimes it's hidden by the sun that we do see. So we have the sun that we don't see and the sun that we do see. And there's a lot of researchers who have actually taken an awful lot of time to investigate this. And certainly there's a lot of interesting information that could be garnered from this way of thinking. But to think about this notion, going back in the esoteric terms, of a source sun or the invisible sun and the visible sun, there's a lot of tie-overs to certain other stars that are mentioned in some of these systems. And it may or may not align with this, but the Freemasons acknowledge the source of our sun as the star Sirius. And that's, you'll notice there's a lot of talk about Sirius in the ufology culture and stuff like that as well. And there's a direct correlation there. It's also said in mainstream science that in, what was it, in like 66,000 years, always notice the numbers too, they claim that Sirius will become the southern pole star for us. And that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. I don't know how it correlates necessarily with the black sun. I'm still exploring those ways of thinking myself. So I'm still ever learning on this stuff. But certainly there's a connection there between Sirius and what they call the black sun. And there's also this connection to perhaps a second body in our solar system that we don't see, but it is a star. And now you're talking about this teacher of Himmler's who was claiming that we had this older burned out star that we can no longer see that was our primary sun at some past time. And some of these ideas align with things taught in some of the Rosicrucian cosmoconception and some of the other forms of esoterica adopted by schools of theosophy and other places that talk about these same type of things. And there's some that have actually equated this to the planet Saturn as we see it now. And Saturn may represent the black sun in some of the symbology. And certainly we see the Saturn symbolism everywhere, all throughout the ancient world, and it's even permeated into modern times. So the black sun also has engrafted Saturn symbolism in it. So you see how it is a massive symbol that represents a lot of different overarching ideas, and it's really hard to come to grips with what's actually accurate with it and what's not, because what has happened over the course of time is many in these occult schools and esoteric schools of thought have engrafted these ideas into these symbols, and sometimes they've conflated two differing ideas together, and they've adopted it moving forward as something that they consider a fact of occultism or a fact of metaphysics, when if you trace it to its roots, you could find faults with that way of thinking. So it's very difficult to discern what's correct and what's incorrect. But the important factor in all of it is how it represents or affects the human consciousness, the human unconscious mind, how it affects the unconscious mind. And the archetype is there, whether you understand it consciously or not, it will affect you. And that's the important thing that needs to be understood. So we have all of these different layers of the onion, as I like to call it here, when you're looking at this black sun ideology, and that ties in here as well. So there's a lot still to unpack with that. So certainly, I forget what the original question even was now that we talking about. I'm on so many side tangents.
I think what we are dealing here with, the order of the black sun, is an inner circle of an inner circle. Why do I say that? Okay, we have the Nazi Party, but not every member of the Nazi Party was also an occultist. Okay, then we have Himmler, and there is a line of thought out there that he fashioned the SS after the Teutonic Knights. And within the Teutonic Knights, there also were 12 knights so to say, elites. And so the inner circle of the inner circle. And we find the 12 segments of the black sun again. So I would say that not even in the SS itself, everybody understood what was going on with the black sun, because that was an inner circle of an inner circle. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's the way many of these occult fraternities operate, even today. What we would call the inner circle of the inner circle today, of at the topmost levels of all these different interlocking and interconnecting secret society groups. This is what we would call the Illuminati today. It's the same type of concept. And yes, I've heard that before, where Himmler built this structure within the SS on the concept of the Teutonic Knights. And he even built elements of this into Wewelsburg Castle. And this is an important thing too. They set this place up. They modeled it after some older structure. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but they modeled it after some older place or older ritualistic place that was important to them at the time. But at any rate, that's just another side note that we could perhaps explore a little later if my memory comes back as to what it was modeled after. But certainly, Himmler did model this structure after those groups. And I do agree with you. Not everybody within the Nazi Party or within the SS, within the greater operation itself, understood what was going on or had any clue whatsoever about some of these occult concepts tied to this or what exactly they were doing. And this is the way of things today, even within these occult fraternities that we have today, the secret brotherhoods, things like the Freemasons. Your average Freemason doesn't have a friggin' clue what he's involved with because he's not in the inner circle within the inner circle. So he doesn't know. So he thinks anything you're talking about like this, oh, that's nonsense. It was probably the same thing within the Nazi Party itself and within the SS. They were probably just guys doing their job and didn't know what was going on or what the esoteric or occult attachment was to all of it. They didn't know what the inner circle was doing. And that's the nature of a lot of this esoterica. They keep the secrets hidden, even from their own members at the lower levels. And this is all part of the system that was adopted later by the military and the intelligence communities, compartmentalization. This is where it comes from. It comes directly from the secret society groups. They've done this for a very long time, and it works. They could keep the secrets hidden if only a very select few people in the inner circle know the details about what's going on. And they could give people on a need-to-know basis what little bits of information they need. Like if they had a particular branch of the SS that was performing a mission of some sort, or they were looking for some artifact or some such thing, they were given maybe a little bit of information they needed about that and given the need to know as far as that goes, but they don't know the big picture. And this is where we lose sight on a lot of things. And this is actually what our education system in the modern era is based upon, too, this compartmentalization factor. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. Think about our education system. Same thing. We have these 40-minute broken down periods of study where you have English class or math class, or you have social studies, history class, science. They're all separated into these little compartmented time frames, and they don't overlap or touch each other at all. One is compartmentalized from the other, so it breaks down the human mind. First of all, it breaks our attention span down into smaller segments, and second of all, it teaches us to compartmentalize information off from one another and not be able to see the big picture of how they interrelate together. So that's an important concept too. Now, the controllers of this world, they do the opposite. They're looking at the big picture. The controllers of this world, or who you might call the inner circle within the inner circle, they look at the big picture. And this is called the cybernetics application of things. It's looking at the big picture of how all these seemingly disparate, interrelated studies could combine together and be used to steer or manipulate an entire system. That's what cybernetics is. It's the science of whole systems control. And we've been taught to think in compartmentalized types of ways where they look at the big picture. They want to control the entire system. So they try to devise and develop these more and more accurate systems to control things through the manipulation of these different compartmentalized forms of doing things. So you have perhaps physicists doing one thing and biologists doing another, and their work doesn't overlap. They don't know one from the other about their disciplines that they study. But those at the top, they're looking at the developments in physics and applying it to the biological. And this is the cyberneticists. This is what they do. They take these different studies and these different disciplines of science, and they tie them together and use them in ways that gives them the best and most accurate and efficient results. So that's what they look to do. That's how the power structure works in this world. And in the meantime, the people involved with the actual work, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. And they're all working together towards an achievement that they don't know what the achievement is. So we see how this crosses over into the modern era in some of our modern ways of thinking. And certainly the Nazi Party did do this, and what you would call this group, the Black Sun, this organization that formed as the inner circle within like the SS and the Nazi Party and all that, they certainly were using the same type of a roadmap to get there. And this is before the definitions, as we're familiar with them today, really came into being. The term cybernetics didn't really get coined until 1948 after the war. And certainly we've had these things going on since pre-World War II. Now, it was called Operations Research during the phases of World War II, and this was carried over into the cybernetics movement that we have today. It's an interdisciplinary scientific way of doing things, and certainly it's been used for social control and for manipulation of society, social engineering. That's what the primary focus of cybernetics has been. And a lot of the methodologies were derived from the uses that were put forward in World War II by both sides. Now, the Nazis utilized this in the way we're talking about towards this concept with the Black Sun and all of these things, whereas the Allied forces used this for operations research and formulated the cybernetics methodologies from there. But all of these things were engrafted together, of course, after the war with Operation Paperclip, and the work is carried on. So they've adopted a lot of the Nazi ideologies into modern Western culture as well. And it's come into the umbrella, under the umbrella of scientific advancements in Western culture. And certainly the ideologies are still there. And we're seeing them manifest today because we're still hunting down 0 point, if you want to look at what a lot of the physicists and scientists of today are talking about. And certainly they want to get there, but in my view, I think they're going about it the wrong way because we've been handed a red herring in quantum physics. But that's just my personal view on that. And that's another can of worms to get into at some point, but maybe not here.
You know what is really irritating to me? I mean, okay, let's say there was a center sun and it burned out. So if something burns out, you could say it's kind of dead. So how do you make the leap from a dead celestial body to a mystical energy? Why would a dead star give you, wonderful powers? I don't get it.
Well, it all has to do with this whole concept that lies all across occultism of the unification of opposites, the union of opposites. This is the same energetic principle represented by gender, the masculine, the feminine. It's the unification of these things. In order to have manifestation, you have to have polar opposites. So, in order for there to be life, there has to be death. In order for there to be light, there has to be dark. In order for there to be black, there has to be white, right? So, we have this, it's an old Hermetic scientific way of thinking the union of opposites. So they need this energetic principle that they could draw from, this death energy, death-based energy. Because you see, we're used to, in the visible, in the light spectrum, the life associated with the sun. So we have life force and life essence and life associated with the sun. Well, in order to garner power from the dark side, you have to have access to that death-based energy. And certainly they've built most of our Western culture and our modern culture around death-based ideas. So this is drawing from that archetype, from that energy, that death-based energy, and bringing it into manifestation in this world. And what am I talking about with this? It's the weaponization of language, first of all. And second of all, it's the corporate fiction that we've all been handed. Corporation, the word corporation is derived from corpse, a dead entity. And this is what they utilize in principle.
The mortgage.
The mortgage, right? The death agreement.
Yeah.
All of these ideas undergird our modern culture. It's all based in these death-based ideas. So are they actually drawing power from that negative pole, dark star? And that's the other question you have to ask. It's about positive, it's about negative. Well, they're trying to influence the world with this negative energy. And this has to do with an old alchemical principle called the Negrito process. That you see, they want to destroy the remnants of the earth here in order that they can rise from the ashes like the phoenix and bring forward the new product, the new world order. And this is certainly what it has to do with. So it's deriving and using this negative death-based energy to socially manipulate the human mind and the human consciousness into a certain direction. And it's towards this Negrito process. And this is undergirded in everything. So when you have a basic understanding of alchemy, then you begin to see this is the first process. It's the breaking down. It's the destructive process. All of these ideas were encapsulated even in the old Indian or Eastern philosophies, in their gods, Vishnu, Brahma, all of these ideas encapsulated in that. It's all alchemy at its core. So we have this destructive force, and that's essentially what they're doing. They're bringing in this destructive force, this negative energy, this death-based energy, and they've permeated all of our culture with it, because of what they're essentially trying to do is destroy the current world order and bring about this new world order, like we were talking about before. All of this has very old esoteric and occult ties, by the way. This isn't a new idea. So a new world order, it's the same old thing as always with these people. About death and rebirth. And that's the energy, that's the principle they're trying to garner from that. So is there something to it? Whether or not there actually exists this burned out dead star, they are invoking that energetic archetype into our reality through the use of the death-based systems they've given us. Even the corporate straw man identity that we have. Your driver's license, your name in all capital letters, that's a representation of you. That's a corporate entity. That's a straw man identity. That's not really you. That's not the living being. It's these kinds of things that have come across the board. Legal fiction. You've become a legal fiction. Your name is represented as a symbol. It's a legal fiction. That's not really you. Your name is not you. Let's put it that way. You are not your name. You are not your beliefs. This is another thing as well. That is not the real you. That's not the ontological self, the I am in the person, the spirit, the soul. It's not what we are, but that's what we've been indoctrinated into believing we are. That's our identity. And it's all based in this death-based system. So they've drawn on these archetypes, and this has been going on since long before the Nazi Party, but certainly that's the core idea here. They're drawing on that death energy, that negative energy, to get things done in this world that they want. And they see it as a way of doing us a favor. This is about the evolution of mankind to the next level in their view. And they think the only way to get there is to utilize the old alchemical sciences. And the first process they need to undergo for mankind at large is this Negrito process, also called the blackening. The blackening. So if you're unfamiliar with alchemy, a primer in the science of alchemy would probably be a good thing for people to understand, so they could see what the ideology is that undergirds all of this, what motivates these people to do the things they do. And that is, the bottom line of where all of that comes from at its core. So this black sun symbol represents the Negrito process in this way as well, the death and rebirth. Now, death being the first part, the burning of a thing. This is what's done. If you want to look at a good example of this alchemical process, there's the alchemy of plants called spagyrics. And this is probably the simplest form of alchemy for people to understand. In the spagyric process, what you do is the first thing you do is you take the plant essence, the plant material, and you burn it to ash until it turns black. And that's why this is called the Negrito process, the blackening. That's the first step. Then you'll reconstitute it with water and wash it and strain the oil and stuff out to get its essence out of it. And then you repeat certain steps of the process through the whole thing. And there's different colors associated with different parts of the process. There's a yellowing phase, there's a red phase, and there's a whitening phase. When you burn something and purify it through the process, at some point that black ash turns into white ash when it gets hot enough. And this is part of the procedure as well in alchemy. So the first step, though, is this Negrito process, which involves the burning of everything. And this is the calling card of these philosophers of fire. They like to burn their enemies. And you'll notice that that always seems to have a tie over into some of these mass scale traumatic events that affect the human consciousness in many ways, like the events of 9/11. Well, there was massive fires and their victims were burned. Same thing with like Oklahoma City and a lot of different things across the board with that. They burn their victims. That's one of their fingerprints that they put on their operations. So when you realize that, you begin to see what's at the core of a lot of this. And the occult is always there. Whether people want to admit to that or not, it's an uncomfortable truth. It's there always. And it ties back to this whole concept.
Yeah, I have to say I totally agree with this obsession with death, and no wonder, all the yeah, the outcome what the Nazis brought was so devastating. And I guess I told you that before in private, that I have personally known people that sat in concentration camps, not because they were Jews, no. Homosexuals were there, gypsies were there, or political opponents, and for religious reasons, what have you, the whole 9 yards. One wrong word and you are going to the camp, and it's, people who try to convince me that that was actually a wonderful time for Germany, and it is also bad that Hitler lost, they piss me off so much.
Yeah, it's interesting that people come at it with that viewpoint and really don't have a perspective into that. And that's the whole thing that's uncomfortable. Now, our history books and stuff have kind of framed this thing into one particular frame of reference for us. And they want us to believe it was the Jews that he was rounding up and putting in these concentration camps. And that's it. And it was just this one targeted group. But from what you're saying, from your firsthand knowledge of this, it was more than that. And a lot of people will acknowledge it was more than that. I mean, it was political dissidents, it was the gypsies, it was even Christians, it was people that had differing ideologies from what the mainline government accepted as their truth or what they wanted their population to be like. So if you were dissenting in any way, off to the camp you went. And I see the echoes of that in our modern times here, in Western cultures all over the world. Here in America, I mean, it's so politically divided. It's ridiculous anymore. It's so bad. It's just a matter of time before something extremely bad like this maybe comes into fruition here, where you have one side calling for the imprisonment of the other. And we saw this during the whole COVID scam that went down too. You had people calling out saying the unvaccinated need to be rounded up and put in camps and stuff like this. You see the echoes of this across even into our modern times, and we just don't seem to learn from our history. And I think a lot of that is because the history is misrecorded or misrepresented to us, because what was done under the regime of the Nazis there was much worse and far more far reaching than what we're told in the mainline history books. And that there's a lot of people that somehow or another come to the conclusion that it wasn't, I don't know, like things were good in Germany at that time. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, we see a lot of that same ideology echoed here. I'll use America as an example, because you do have some people that are in the upper class and upper middle class that seem to be doing well right now, even though our economy is in the tank. It's terrible. Everything, inflation's so bad. Like I personally, I'm having a hard time keeping groceries on the table. I got 5 kids at home, and it's expensive. Every trip to the grocery store is like ridiculous anymore because the prices have gone so high. But at any rate, you have people that are actually comfortable and they think everything's great, and they're going to go along and they're going to vote for 4 more years of this nonsense that's been happening. And you can't break through the paradigm. We're still caught in that right left paradigm here. And people are going to think they're going to vote their way out of this when that's not going to happen. But at any rate, you see, there are some people that think things are great here, and they just don't have a clue as to what it's like for the vast bulk of the people who are suffering under this regime we have now. And that's the uncomfortable truth of all of it. The vast majority of the people are not living comfortably, but the ones that are living comfortably are the ones that seem to be the ones that align in some of these major voting districts and stuff like that here. And I think it was a similar situation back in Nazi Germany when the Nazi Party was in power. You probably had some of those people that didn't see the effects of the things that were being done as much as others. They were kind of sheltered from it. We have the same thing going on here right now. There's some portions of our culture here that are sheltered from it. They don't see it. But the vast majority are actually suffering under the the control of the regime, and they're afraid to speak up because they see what happens when you speak up. And especially I think that's what happened during that time in Germany. So I don't have direct access to witnesses to all of that like you do, but certainly it sounds like what you're describing. I would think it's the same thing, that you have people that will say things weren't so great when this was going on here, even though a lot of people say otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I also want to have a look at here, and here comes Sirius, comes into the picture again, is the Anunnaki and the Nazis. We have this one Anunnaki, Ninhursag, and she had a child, and that child was called Naz, N-A-Z. And this Naz refers to Canis Major, a constellation that occupies, that also Sirius occupies. So you know, because we have all these little threads. Yeah, we are getting information from Aldebaran. There was a burnt out sun, and we get super duper mystical powers from there. So no matter how you slice it, there always comes up this, yeah, ET moment.
Yeah, there's always that connection there, isn't there? And that's
Yeah.
Canis Major, the dog star. That's why Sirius is known as the dog star. And if you just look, dog spelled backwards is God. So
Mhm.
this is the inversion of God being displayed right there. When you look at it from that perspective, you begin to understand a few more things as well. So you have all of these notions of perhaps these alien beings being in contact with humanity. And in my view, I think this is kind of a red herring of sorts, because they try in our modern cosmology, they try to represent all of this stuff as quote unquote extraterrestrial, meaning these are alien beings from other planets out there in space. It's all part of this physical realm. I think it transcends that to some degree. I think it's interdimensional as far as things like that go, for lack of better ways of thinking about it, that they cross in from different planes of existence or realms of existence and communicate to us in that way. It's more of a spiritual phenomenon than a physical phenomenon. That's just my viewpoint. Now, perhaps there's a physical element to that. I don't know. I don't have the answers to that, but many people seem to align in the ways of thinking about this with this physical extraterrestrial type paradigm. And a lot of that's been represented in popular culture by television shows like Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, that's been on for in excess of 20 years now. And think about the massive cultural influence this has had on people, because it's represented on a channel called the History Channel. And they're giving you their theories. And these are just theories that these guys have. And oftentimes they're misrepresenting things to you on purpose just to back up their ideology or their theory that they want to present to you. And this is demonstrable when you go back and you really research into some of the things that they show you on there as evidences. But at any rate, I digress on that point. I mean, the cinematography on that show is fantastic, and they have had a lot of good information they put out too. So can't bash them too much for that. But certainly, this is where the popularization of things like the Anunnaki come from, because they look at the writings of like Sitchin and the writings of Eric von Däniken and all of these guys who kind of popularized this since the 1960s here in the modern era, like this notion and this way of thinking. So we have this crossover, and this is just a more modern spin or more modern take on the myth representation of the same archetypes that are ever present there. And that's my viewpoint on all of that. But certainly we do see the hearkening back to Sirius, the dog star, once again. And there is this connotation there. And like I said, I mean, even in mainstream science, they give some type of reverential treatment to Sirius for some reason or another. And a lot of this ties back to the teachings of Freemasonry and some of the other places when it comes down to it. So they view Sirius as being something that has an energetic influence of sorts on this place in which we live and exist. So, and like I said, they're even saying something like in 66,000 more years or something, the Earth will shift and Sirius will become the pole star for the southern continent or for the southern hemisphere here. And these kind of things make you wonder, well, where are they coming up with that idea from? And why are they using those specific numbers? And why are they putting such emphasis on this one particular star? And then when you begin to look at the other side, the metaphysical aspects here, you come across people like Dr. Stephen Greer, who did an entire documentary series about Sirius and claims to have these connections or these contacts with these beings, I guess, from Sirius, and makes all of these different connotations attached to it, which directly tie to this extraterrestrial hypothesis. And you have to wonder, what's up with it? Is this all manipulation? Is there something to it? I don't have the full answer, but I find it more than coincidental that this focus of attention of the secret society groups for the longest time all of a sudden has fallen in line with some of the mainstream ufology circles that have come out discussing these things. And they try to reassert this position that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the one that makes the most sense. And I don't know if I buy that necessarily. I think, like I said, there's more spiritual components to it, or it transcends just physical manifestation here. That's my take.
Yeah, I can see both sides somehow. I totally agree that many phenomena that and we have experiences. I mean, there's no way around that. But many things that they have experienced might be interdimensional. Yes, I would agree with that. But I also think that we are not the only inhabited celestial body that is in the vastness of the universe. So but I think for us, it's it's not always easy to differentiate between the two, especially because we have this one-sided narrative. If it were discussed more transparently and openly, then that would be a different story. But unfortunately, that is not the case.
No, that is the unfortunate thing. It's this lack of transparency because, in my view, there are people in this world that do have a better idea of the truths behind some of these things and the operation of some of these things than we do. And they're not being forthright about that. And there's a reason for that. And of course, that reason always ties back to the notion of control. These people want control, they want power over others. And this is the very nature of secrecy. And this is why I have a problem with secret societies. Because if you know something that somebody else doesn't, that gives you a type of advantage over them, doesn't it? It gives you power of some sort over them. And these organizations have arranged themselves in such a way where they hold some of these secrets for themselves and use the power that they garner from knowing those secrets against other people. Now, this falls back to maybe keeping under wraps some of the things they know about natural science from antiquity. And they've taught us to think in opposite ways of what is truthful with that. That's why it's useful and it's important to look back at some of these old scientific disciplines like alchemy, like natural science, like hermetics, gives you a better understanding of how things truly operate in this world. And they've kept many of those secrets hidden at the topmost levels of the inner circles of these secret society groups so that they could weaponize and use those principles against us. Just the awareness that there exists these energetic influences out there among the stars that could affect life on Earth here in certain ways at certain time periods. They weaponize that. They use that against us. They leverage that against us. There's a reason they perform so many operations in September and in during the Ides of March and leading up into the season of sacrifice and all of these things that have come to be known by conspiracy researchers out there. But there's a real science behind it that they've kept hidden from us. They've taught us to think in terms that things like astrology are nonsensical or silly or there's nothing to it, saying that Mercury's in retrograde. They've turned it into a joke, but there's a real energetic influence that can and does oftentimes affect life here on Earth in certain ways. And they've understood this and they've quantified this in certain ways and recorded it, and they know how to manipulate it. And like I said, oftentimes this is used in a weaponized fashion against us because it gives them an advantage over us, doesn't it? They know what's the best time to start my new business venture where I will be guaranteed more success based upon the motion of the stars and the planets and stuff like that. And they use that all the time. But they want us to laugh at that and think there's nothing to it. And they've been successful in indoctrinating us into believing that. And that's just one example of the many ways in which they do this and why it is that they keep the secrets and why it is that I am thoroughly convinced that there are some people in this world that have a better understanding than we do, and they're keeping it quiet so that they could maintain their power and control. And that's problematic, especially if they claim to be working for the good of the masses, which many of them do. It's for the greater good. They think they're doing us a favor by invoking this negative energy, this death based energy, this Negrito process upon humanity in order to ascend us in our next level of evolution. That's their story, and they're sticking to it, but we don't know because they're not sharing what they know with us. So I find that problematic. If it's good for everybody, why keep it secret? And of course, they always use the argument, don't cast your pearls before swine, but that only goes so far. And that's something I've always had an issue with.
Yeah, I would say it has more to do with the power grab. And yeah, but believe it or not, our first hour is already gone. If you're okay with it, I would like to take it in the second hour into eugenics, because that also ties in here. So that was the first hour, and we will see the patrons on the other side.